All right. Thing is that last lesson, I think 5 students couldn't come for various reasons, and I don't think that they'll be back tomorrow. So I thought it might be a good idea to do parts of the lesson now, so that those who can't come may have the chance to also learn something, because learn they must. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to refer to the text that you are supposed to study for next time. Not very long text, 300 words, and it's so to speak the second part or another excerpt from that book, Notes from the Midnight Driver. Okay, we discussed the first part and now we do the second part. And I promised that I would give you a number of questions, I think 9, for you to answer in writing in the lesson, so that you can show yourself, the others, and me how deeply you have studied this text. Right? And I think and I hope that you have done it in a responsible way. Okay, you don't know the questions, but I do, and this is on my sheet, the questions on my sheet, and of course the answers I'm going to give are okay. They are grammatically speaking fine, and the content is okay, but of course you can say the same thing with other words. All right, so that's hopefully clear. The first question, I have to read it out there. In the first paragraph of the excerpt, lines 1 to 4, what does Alex say about his sentence? And sentence being translated as Urteil. Name 3 things. Now, next lesson, I expect you to be able to answer those bleeding questions. And the first answer should be along these lines. He says, first of all, in the first sentence, that he welcomes his sentence, his assignment, because it allows him to right his wrong and to learn from his mistakes. In Klammern, he has been sentenced for the accidents that we have discussed. He has been sentenced for this accident to 100 hours of social work in a care or a nursing home. Yeah, nursing home. Mm-hmm. And now he writes a letter to the judge who gave him this sentence. And the first thing he says is, right, thank you, Judge, Your Honor, for this sentence, because it allows me to learn from my mistakes and to become a better person. There's a but, right? A but. And the but is, he indicates, andeutet, that this sentence is a little bit harsh, strict, streng, because after all, schließlich endlich, he hasn't hurt anybody. You may remember that he had an accident and that he didn't hurt or injured a human being, but that he ran over a garden gnome. That's it. And he thinks 100 hours of social work is too much for this offense. So that is what he says, right? Now, he writes this letter. The second question is, why does he write this letter? Of course, he writes the letter in a polite way, but his aim is for him, the judge, to give him a new assignment, because this assignment is too difficult for him, he says. So the straight answer is, he wants the judge to change the sentence and give him a new assignment. Right, so next question, very simple, one sentence. Who is Mr. Solomon Lewis? Well, Mr. Solomon Lewis is a person and who lives in this nursing home. That's it. He is a person who lives in this nursing home, and it is Alex's job to look after him and that causes some problems. But the short answer is he is someone, a resident of this nursing home. Now, next question, number 4, that would be, name 4 reasons why Alex is not happy, nicht einverstanden, with this assignment, looking after Mr. Lewis, right? The first one, of course, is Alex, is not qualified enough to do this job. He is not qualified enough to do the job, right? He's just a young person who made a mistake, and now he gets this job. And this job needs somebody else, not him. He has not the knowledge, the education to do this job, okay? You can take that seriously. Now, why is that the case, that he is not good enough for this job or qualified enough for the job? Because Mr. Lewis has mental problems. He has problems with his memory and with his attitude, and that should be dealt with by an expert who is an expert on mental diseases, right? So, number 1, Alex is not qualified. Number 2, he's not qualified because Mr. Lewis needs a specialist and not just a young boy. Number 3, Mr. Lewis, the text says, is verbally abusive. Verbally abusive. Verbally, of course, means with words. In other words, Mr. Lewis calls Lewis names. He calls him imbecile, Schwachkopf, and things of that nature. Well, I, of course, would never say that to my students. But Mr. Lewis, says that to Alex, and Alex doesn't like it. He does not want to be insulted, offended by Mr. Lewis. Okay. And number 4, Mr. Lewis is not only rude, impolite, harsh to Alex, but also to the other residents in the caring home, or whatever, the residents, old people's home, because he suggests, Vorschlag andeuten, that the other residents, the other old people, should be mercy killed. Yeah, well, I think you know what it means. Mercy killed means basically just should be killed, put away. Yeah. So that's not very nice, and Alex doesn't want to deal with that anymore. That's too much for him. Next question is, what is Yiddish? Yiddish is the language that Mr. Lewis speaks, and so that indicates that Alex doesn't understand everything that Mr. Lewis says. And Yiddish is the language, the book explains that, is the language that people in Eastern Europe, Jewish people in Eastern Europe, spoke, and their descendants, Nachkommen, still speak. So sometimes he speaks in Yiddish. All right. Now, there is one more reason why Alex doesn't want to stay. And that's a series.
Laut Wikipedia, ein Wort ist eine selbstständige sprachliche Einheit.
Ja, halt die Klappe. Alexa, Radio bitte ausschalten. Ich habe Alexa überhaupt nicht irgendwie gebeten, was zu sagen. Die ist vorwitzig. Könnte, also, naja, egal. Anyway, so all right, so the next reason why Alex doesn't want to stay is that Mr. Lewis suffers from a serious lung disease, Lungenkrankheit, lung disease. And sometimes he has great difficulties breathing. And then if Alex is there to look after Mr. Lewis, Alex doesn't know what to do. And how could he? He's not a doctor. So he says, you cannot entrust me this person because I'm not qualified, I'm not a doctor. So if you give it, if I am given the task to look after Mr. Lewis, that's dangerous for Mr. Lewis. And you can take that seriously. You don't have to take him seriously, Lewis, Alex, but this is a serious point as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so in this little text, as it should be, at the end of the text, there's this kind of summary. And the summary gives you the reason in a sentence that why Alex wants to leave, wants a different job, so to speak. And the reason is that he claims that he is not qualified enough to assist, to help Mr. Lewis. That sums it all up. That is the main gist of his letter, right? And the others are the Ausführungen, the explanations why that is the case. Okay. Now, the next, last but one question is, Alex in his letter suggests that 4 people with certain jobs are better qualified than he is. And you should have read the text good enough so that you know who these 4 jobs are, people in these jobs are. And number 1 is, he thinks a psychiatrist would be better, a psychiatrist, a linguist would be better, a paratrooper, Paramedic, Paratrooper wäre ein Fallschirmspringer. Oh gut. Paramedic, also so ein Mensch, Notfallhilfe, would be okay, or a saint, ein Heiliger. Okay, so these are the 4 groups of people who might be helpful. And I come back to that in a minute. And at the end of this text, Alex, who is the first person narrator, of course, he characterizes himself, or rather his mind, and he uses 2 adjectives. And the adjectives you should know. The adjectives are sensible and adolescent. So he calls himself and his mind sensitive, sensibel, and adolescent. Er ist noch heranwachsend, and that is why he is unfit for the job. Okay, so these are the questions we're going to discuss next time. Now, I come back to this thing about characterization, because characterization is basically what we're going to do, or what we're doing. If you look at this sentence, that he says that a psychiatrist, a linguist, a paramedic, or a saint would be preferable, sollten bevorzugt werden, preferable for this job, better for this job. This is not a characterization. That is a statement. And this is what you put in task 1 when you are asked to sum up what the text says. Now, this is what he says. That's not a characterization. That would be the next step. And the next step would be that this sentence, where he suggests 4 people or professions that are better suited than he is. Now, you say what this sentence tells you about him. Now, is that a sign, a sign of him being caring, dass sich kümmert, of him being considerate, or of him being lazy, that he doesn't want this job and that he uses that as a pretext and forward to get rid of the job? That's for you to decide, but the characterization would be to say precisely that. Right? That is something that characterizes him. And then you might look at the word saint. He says a saint, ein Heiliger, would be good for the job. Now you say that in task 1 when you are asked to summarize this letter, and in task 2 when you characterize him, you explain what that tells you about him. And there you might talk about that this is an example of humor or sarcasm. That is, that depends on you almost. All right? Okay, so we're going to do that next time. We do it in greater details, and we do some more other things. But basically, if you have listened to those 15 minutes, you will have a basic idea of what the lesson will be about. All right? And I know we are not in a situation where the school is closed, the school is open, but still last time 5 students out of 20 couldn't show up, and so that is perhaps helpful for all. Right, okay, so thank you for listening. See you next time. Yeah.